At 2:17 in the morning, Daniel Mercer's phone began to ring. He almost ignored it. It was late. The house was dark. And there was no reason anyone should have been calling him at that hour. Then he looked at the screen. The caller ID said, "Home." Daniel stared at it for several seconds. He hadn't seen that name on a telephone display in more than 30 years. Because home was the number of the house where he grew up. The house that burned down in 1991. The house where his mother died. The number had been disconnected the morning after the fire. There was no house anymore. No telephone line. No number. And certainly no reason for that phone to be calling him. Daniel almost let it ring. Then he answered. For several seconds, there was only static. A faint electrical hiss. Then a woman's voice. Quiet. Weak. Almost buried beneath the noise. She said his name. Daniel. He froze. Because he recognized the voice immediately. It was his mother. She had been dead for 30 years. Then she said something that would eventually become the center of a decades-old mystery. "Don't come home." The line went dead. Daniel didn't sleep that night. By sunrise, he had convinced himself there had to be an explanation. A wrong number. A technical error. Someone using an old telephone number. Perhaps even a cruel prank. But there was one problem. Daniel knew exactly what his mother's voice sounded like. And there were certain things about that call that no stranger could have known. 3 days later, he would discover that the telephone company still had a record of the number. And that record contained something even stranger. The number had supposedly been disconnected in 1991. Yet somehow, it had made a call. Daniel Mercer had grown up in a small 2-story house at the edge of a town called Bellwether. The house wasn't remarkable. White wooden siding. A narrow front porch. 2 bedrooms upstairs. A kitchen at the back. And an old telephone mounted on the wall beside the staircase. The telephone had belonged to Daniel's parents for as long as he could remember. It was a heavy rotary phone. Black. Made almost entirely from hard plastic and metal. There was no caller ID. No voicemail. No digital display. Just a receiver connected to the wall. Daniel's mother, Helen, used it constantly. She called relatives, doctors, neighbors, the local grocery store, and sometimes, when Daniel was young, she would call his bedroom from downstairs just to tell him dinner was ready. The house was ordinary. The family was ordinary. Until the winter of 1991. Daniel was 21 years old. He had recently moved to another city for work. His parents remained in Bellwether. His mother was 53. His father, Richard, was 56. On the evening of January 14th, Daniel spoke to his mother on the telephone. It was a normal conversation. She asked how his new job was going. she complained about the weather. She told him she had found an old photograph from his childhood. And before hanging up, she said something that Daniel would remember for the rest of his life. "Call me tomorrow." Daniel promised he would. He never got the chance. At approximately 2:17 the following morning, the Mercer house caught fire. A neighbor reported seeing flames coming from an upstairs window. Firefighters arrived minutes later. The fire had already spread through the roof. By the time the flames were extinguished, most of the upper floor had collapsed. Richard Mercer was found near the staircase. Helen was discovered in the rear bedroom. Both were pronounced dead at the scene. The official investigation classified the fire as accidental. An electrical fault was suspected. The telephone line was disconnected the following morning. The house was eventually demolished. The property remained vacant, and the Mercer family home became nothing more than a memory. For Daniel, the memories were painful enough that he rarely returned. He kept a few photographs, some letters, his mother's jewelry, and one object he couldn't bring himself to throw away: a small address book. Inside it was the old family telephone number. He never called it. He knew there was nobody there. 30 years passed. Then came the phone call. At 2:17 a.m. from home. The next morning, Daniel searched through the old address book. He found the number. The same sequence of digits. Exactly as it appeared on his phone the previous night. He stared at it for a long time. Then he called his telephone provider. The conversation was brief. Daniel asked whether an old number could somehow appear on caller ID after being disconnected. The representative told him that under normal circumstances it shouldn't. There were technical explanations for incorrect caller identification, spoofing, routing errors, database problems. But the representative asked Daniel something that made him uncomfortable. "What number appeared on your screen?" Daniel gave it to her. There was a pause. Then she asked, "Are you certain that's the number?" "Yes." Another pause. "That number hasn't been active for decades." Daniel already knew that. But then the representative said something else. "There is something strange in the system." Daniel asked what she meant. She said the number still existed in an old historical database, but it was marked as permanently disconnected. No active customer. No assigned line. No forwarding service. Nothing. Daniel asked if someone could have spoofed the number. She said it was possible, and that should have ended the matter. Except Daniel had recorded the call. Not intentionally. His smartphone had been recording audio because he had been documenting everything since the night before. He played the recording again. The voice was faint, but unmistakable. "Daniel." Then, "Don't come home." There was something else beneath the words. A sound. Almost like static. Almost like wind. Daniel listened several times. Then he heard it. A second sound. 3 soft knocks. 1, 2, 3. Exactly like someone tapping on a wooden door. Daniel didn't tell many people about the call. He was afraid they would think he was grieving, or that 30 years had distorted his memories. Eventually, however, he told his younger sister, Laura. Laura remembered their mother too. She had been 16 when the fire happened. Unlike Daniel, she had remained in Bellwether. She had lived with relatives after the fire. When Daniel told her about the call, she didn't laugh. She didn't question him. She simply asked, "What did she say?" Daniel repeated the words. Laura became silent. Then she asked, "Did she say your name first?" "Yes." Laura looked at him. "That sounds like her." Daniel asked what she meant. Laura told him something she had never mentioned before. The night of the fire, she had been awake. She had been staying at a friend's house. But earlier that evening, she had spoken to their mother on the telephone. Helen had sounded worried. Not frightened, just worried. She told Laura that someone had been standing outside the house. A man. She couldn't see his face. Every time she looked through the upstairs window, he was standing across the street. Laura assumed it was nothing. She told her mother to lock the doors. Helen laughed. Then she said, "I already did." That was the last conversation Laura ever had with her. Daniel asked why she had never told him about the man. Laura said she had forgotten, or thought she had, until the phone call. Then another memory returned. Their mother had mentioned the time. She had said the man appeared around 2:17. Daniel felt a cold sensation move through his stomach. The phone call had come at exactly the same time. A week later, Daniel returned to Bellwether. He drove to the location where the house had once stood. There was almost nothing left. The property had changed. A small road had been extended through the area. The old trees were gone. A row of utility poles stood where the house had once been. But the foundation remained. Daniel stood outside the property for several minutes. Then he noticed something. Near the edge of the foundation was a small concrete box, partially buried. He had never seen it before. He approached it. The lid was cracked. Inside was an old telephone junction. The metal components were heavily corroded. Daniel photographed it. Then he noticed a cable running beneath the ground. It disappeared beneath the road. Daniel contacted the local historical society. An archivist named Margaret Ellis agreed to help. She had spent years documenting the town's old infrastructure. When Daniel showed her the photograph, she immediately recognized the equipment. She told him it was part of the original telephone network. Daniel asked if the line could still be connected. Margaret laughed. "No." "How do you know?" because the entire network was replaced in 1993. Daniel showed her the number. Margaret stopped smiling. She recognized it. It was listed in an old municipal telephone directory. The entry had a handwritten note beside it. Disconnected, January 1991. Daniel asked if she knew who had written the note. Margaret said the records didn't indicate it. Then she opened another file. A fire investigation report. Daniel had seen the report before, but he had never read all of it. Margaret pointed to a section near the bottom. The fire investigator had recorded the condition of the telephone. It had been found in the hallway. Burned. Melted. Completely disconnected from the wall. Daniel stared at the photograph attached to the report. The telephone was unmistakable. Black plastic. Rotary dial. Cracked receiver. It was the same telephone he remembered from childhood. Then Daniel noticed something. The telephone cord was missing. The original fire report contained another detail. At 2:13 a.m., a neighbor had reported hearing a telephone ringing. The neighbor's name was Walter Price. He lived across the street. According to his statement, the ringing continued for approximately 2 minutes, then stopped. 3 minutes later, he saw flames. The official report dismissed the timing as coincidence. But Daniel couldn't stop thinking about it. His phone had rung at 2:17. His mother had died in the house. The old telephone had been destroyed. And yet the number had somehow appeared on his phone 30 years later. Then Daniel found something else. Walter Price was still alive. He was 91 years old. Daniel tracked him down. They met at a nursing home outside Bellwether. Daniel explained why he had come. Walter listened quietly. Then Daniel asked him about the fire. The old man closed his eyes. "I remember the ringing." Daniel asked what time it happened. Walter answered immediately. 2:17. Daniel felt his hands tighten. "Are you certain?" Walter looked at him. "I've never forgotten it." Daniel asked whether he had seen anyone outside. Walter hesitated. Then he said, "Yes. A man. Yes." "What did he look like?" Walter stared at the floor. "I couldn't see his face." "Was he standing near the house?" "No." "Where?" Walter pointed toward the window. "Across the street." Daniel asked what happened next. Walter said the man simply walked away. Not toward the road. Not toward another house. He walked directly into the darkness behind the trees. Daniel asked if he had ever told the police. Walter said yes. But the statement wasn't included in the final report. Daniel asked why. Walter smiled sadly. "Because the police thought I was drunk." For several weeks, the investigation went nowhere. There were explanations for almost everything. The caller ID could have been spoofed. The voice could have been an imitation. Daniel's memory could have been affected by grief. The old telephone number could have appeared through a technical error. Walter could have remembered the time incorrectly. Even the man outside the house could have been an ordinary stranger. Every piece of evidence had a possible explanation. Then Daniel received another call. 2:17 a.m. Same number. Home. This time he didn't answer immediately. He watched the phone vibrate. Once. Twice. 3 times. Then the ringing stopped. A voicemail appeared. Daniel stared at the screen. He pressed play. Static. A faint breathing sound. Then his mother's voice. Daniel. He nearly dropped the phone. Then she said, "You came back." The recording ended. Daniel checked the timestamp. 2:17 a.m. He hadn't told anyone that he had returned to Bellwether. Except Laura. And Margaret. Neither knew where he was staying. Daniel called Laura. She answered immediately. He told her about the voicemail. There was a long silence. Then Laura asked, "Where are you?" Daniel told her. Laura's voice changed. "You need to leave." "Why?" "Because Mom used to say something about that house." "What?" "She said the telephone wasn't ringing for us." Daniel waited. Laura continued. "She said it was ringing for someone else." The following morning, Daniel contacted the telephone company again. This time he asked for technical records. He expected nothing. Instead, the representative told him that the company had received another unusual request. The old number had generated a routing event. Not a normal call. Not an active telephone connection. But a digital signal associated with the number. Daniel asked when. The representative gave him the time. 2:17 a.m. Daniel asked where the signal originated. The representative said she couldn't determine that. But she could determine where it had been routed. His phone. Daniel asked whether someone could have spoofed it. She said yes. Then Daniel asked the question that mattered. Could someone have done it using the original telephone line? The representative said no. The line didn't exist anymore. It had been physically removed decades earlier. Daniel thanked her. Before ending the call, she said, "There is something else." "What?" The system received the same number again. When? 30 years ago. Daniel stopped breathing. What date? The representative checked. January 15th, 1991. The morning after the fire. The old number had generated one final signal. At 2:17 a.m., Daniel requested the archived telephone records. Eventually, he obtained a copy. The document was simple. A technical log. Most entries were routine. Calls. Maintenance. Disconnect notices. Then one entry stood out. 217 incoming signal. The source number. The Mercer home. The destination. Unknown. Duration. 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Daniel stared at the record. The house had already burned. His parents were dead. The telephone line was supposedly disconnected. Yet 4 minutes of communication had been recorded. Daniel asked the telephone company if audio from the call survived. Didn't. But the destination field contained a number. Daniel recognized it. It was his own childhood bedroom extension. A number that had never been publicly listed. A number that had ceased to exist after the fire. Someone or something had apparently called the house from the house. Years later, Daniel would say that was the moment he stopped believing the mystery could be explained by a simple technical error. Because a spoofed caller could imitate a number. A prankster could imitate a voice. A database could contain outdated information. But none of those explanations accounted for the old routing record. And they certainly didn't explain the voice. Daniel returned to the property one final time. It was raining. The foundation was covered in weeds. The old telephone junction was still there. He brought a metal detector. Not because he expected to find anything supernatural. He simply wanted to understand what remained beneath the ground. After several hours, the detector produced a signal near the old foundation. Daniel began digging. He found a small metal box. Inside was a collection of burned electrical components. And beneath them, a telephone receiver. Black. Melted on one side. The rotary dial was partially destroyed. Daniel recognized it immediately. It was the telephone from his childhood home. The same telephone shown in the fire investigation photograph. He took it home. Then he made a mistake. He plugged it into nothing. There was no telephone line. No battery. No electrical connection. Nothing. He placed it on a table. At 2:17 that night, it rang. Daniel later claimed he didn't touch it. He simply stared at the receiver. The bell rang once. Then twice. Then 3 times. He picked it up. There was no static this time. No interference. No distorted voice. Only silence. Then he heard breathing. A woman's breathing. Daniel whispered, "Mom." The voice answered. But this time, it wasn't his mother's voice. It was his own. A recording of himself. From the previous phone call. Repeating the words he had spoken. "Mom." Then the recording changed. Another voice appeared beneath it. A man's voice. Very faint. very close. It said, "She shouldn't have answered either." Daniel dropped the receiver. The line went silent. The investigation never reached a definitive conclusion. Some researchers believe the calls were sophisticated acts of telephone spoofing. Others believe the family story became distorted over decades. Some argue that Daniel's grief caused him to recognize familiar patterns in meaningless sounds. There are rational explanations. There always are. But several details remain difficult to reconcile. The original telephone number really was disconnected in 1991. The house really did burn down. Helen Mercer really did die that night. The historical telephone records really do contain an unexplained signal at 2:17 a.m. And according to surviving documentation, someone reported hearing the telephone ring before the fire. 30 years later, Daniel received calls from the same number, at the same time, and both times, the caller knew his name. There is one final piece of evidence. It was discovered after Daniel died. A recording he had made during his final investigation. The audio lasts less than 6 minutes. For most of it, Daniel is speaking quietly about the house. He describes the foundation, the old telephone, the fire. Then, at exactly 2:17 a.m., the recording captures the telephone ringing. Daniel picks up the receiver. He says, "Hello." There is silence. Then a woman's voice, very faint. "Daniel." He says, "Mom." The woman answers, "No." Daniel becomes silent. Then another voice speaks. A man's voice. The same voice that had appeared beneath the previous recording. It says, "You're not supposed to remember." The recording ends. Investigators who examined the audio could not establish whether the voices were genuine. There was no independent way to determine their source. No identifiable caller. No surviving telephone connection. No evidence of an active transmitter. And no proof that the voice belonged to anyone who had ever lived in the Mercer house. The story should end there. A strange telephone call. An old house. A family tragedy. A collection of records that don't quite fit together. But there is one detail that makes the case especially disturbing. Daniel's mother died in 1991. Daniel received the first call 30 years later. And the final recording was made shortly before his own death. According to the timestamp, it was recorded at 2:17 a.m. The last thing heard on the tape isn't a telephone ringing. It isn't his mother's voice. It isn't the mysterious man's voice. It is Daniel himself, speaking quietly, as though he is answering someone standing directly beside him. He says, "I know." Pause. Then, "I remember now." And 3 seconds later, the recording stops. No explanation was ever found. No one knows what Daniel believed he remembered. And no one knows who was on the other end of that telephone. Perhaps the calls were elaborate hoaxes. Perhaps grief turned coincidence into something terrifying. Perhaps an old telephone number was manipulated by someone who knew the Mercer family history. Or perhaps, somewhere beneath the ruins of an ordinary house in Bellwether, a telephone once connected two moments that were never supposed to touch. A mother who died in 1991. A son who answered 30 years later. And a voice that seemed to know exactly when he would pick up. Because the strangest part of the story isn't that Daniel received a call from a house that no longer existed. It isn't even that the caller sounded like his dead mother. It's the time. 2:17 a.m. The exact time the telephone rang before the fire. The exact time the first signal appeared after the house was destroyed. And the exact time Daniel received the calls 30 years later. Whatever happened in that house, someone or something was still calling. And the next time the phone rang, Daniel wasn't the one who answered.